Most people ask the wrong question when they compare real estate and stocks. They ask which one makes more money. I ask which one makes more money after it is finished, charging you for time, stress, leverage, illiquidity, maintenance, and your own bad behavior. That is the first thing I want you to understand. A rental property and an index fund do not live in the same universe just because both are called investments. One of them is a machine that often uses debt-tenant behavior, local politics, and your own willingness to operate a small business. The other is a machine that uses scale, market earnings, corporate productivity, and your own willingness to leave it alone. People compare the two as if they are simply choosing between a house and a brokerage account. That is childish. You are not choosing between objects. You are choosing between engines. That is the mother line of this whole story. An engine does not only have output, it has friction, and most people never count the friction. That is why the wrong investment looks brilliant. On the day you buy it, and exhausting 10 years later, people fall in love with visible output and ignore invisible drag. A landlord sees a rent check and feels intelligent. An index investor sees a quiet statement and feels underwhelmed. The social proof all favors the landlord in the beginning. He can point at the house. He can tell stories about the tenant. He can drive by the thing he owns and feel the psychological reward of tangibility. The index investor has a number on a screen and no dinner. Party theater. That is exactly why so many people get this comparison wrong. They measure the emotional drama of the early years instead of the total math of the full cycle. Real estate is loud. Stocks are quiet. Loud things get more credit than they deserve. Quiet things get dismissed until the compounding becomes impossible to ignore. So when people ask me whether real estate or stocks will make them more money, I tell them the answer depends less on the headline return and more on whether they included everything. Did you include the hours? Did you include the repairs? Did you include the emotional cost of leverage? Did you include the concentration risk of one property in one zip code? Did you include the fact that a stock portfolio can compound while you sleep and a rental house can call you at 2 a.m. because the water heater quit? Did you include the fact that a rental property can use a bank's money and magnify appreciation while the index fund usually cannot? Did you include the fact that a panicked human being will often sell stocks at the exact wrong moment while the landlord cannot panic, sell a roof leak on a Tuesday afternoon? That is the real math. And once you start doing that math honestly, the answer gets much more interesting. The first mechanism is what I call the story premium. A man buys a rental house and immediately feels richer. A man buys an index fund and immediately feels ignored. That difference matters more than it should because human beings are suckers for visible stories. The landlord gets a key, a tenant, a monthly rent number, maybe a tax deduction he can talk about, maybe an appraisal number that lets him feel validated. He has something the world recognizes as serious. The index investor has none of that. He has a position statement. Nobody at a barbecue leans in when you say you bought a total market fund. Nobody asks you what color your ETF is. Nobody says, "Wow, that's amazing. You really own that." When you point at a diversified basket of productive corporations, that is the story premium. Real estate wins it by a mile. And because it wins the emotional premium early, people often assume it must also be winning the math. That is the trap. The story premium makes you forgive things you would never forgive elsewhere. If a stock investment demanded midnight phone calls, surprise capital expenditures, legal disputes, missed payments, and manual oversight, the average person would call it a nightmare. But call the same thing a rental property and suddenly it sounds like responsibility, wealth, and adulthood. The market rarely flatters you that way. That is why I mistrust emotional proof so much. An investment that feels impressive is often simply an investment with better theater. Theater is not return. Theater is cost wearing a costume. The second mechanism is what I call the leverage mirage. This is where real estate earns its cult. A man puts down $50,000 and suddenly controls a $250,000 asset. That is intoxicating. And the truth is, leverage is powerful. It can make an otherwise ordinary annual appreciation rate look astonishing. because the appreciation happens on the whole property value, not just on your down payment. That is not fake. That is real math. If the house appreciates from $250,000 to $275,000, the owner just captured a gain equal to half his initial cash stake before counting mortgage amortization. That feels like genius. Sometimes it is just leverage. That distinction matters because leverage has a twin brother that people always forget to invite into the conversation: fragility. If appreciation shows up, leverage feels brilliant. If the property stays flat, underperforms, gets hit with large repairs, or the local market weakens while you still owe a 7% mortgage and your tenant turns troublesome, then leverage stops looking like a gift and starts looking like pressure. This is why I call it the leverage mirage. Not because the upside is fake, because people see only the magnifying glass and forget it. Works both ways. Leverage magnifies appreciation. It also magnifies mistakes. It magnifies wrong assumptions about rent growth. It magnifies the pain of vacancy. It magnifies the damage of bad underwriting. It magnifies the consequences of buying in the wrong neighborhood, with the wrong tax burden, with the wrong maintenance profile, or at the wrong price. This is where stock investors often misunderstand real estate, and real estate investors often misunderstand themselves. The landlord feels like a mastermind because the bank helped him control more asset value than he could have purchased outright. Fine, but if the bank is part of the return, then the bank is also part of the risk. You do not get the magnified upside without agreeing to magnified sensitivity. That is why I do not ask whether leverage exists. I ask whether the operator deserves it. Most do not. The third mechanism is what I call the friction tax. This is where real estate loses a lot of its fantasy. On paper, the property looks marvelous. Down payment, rent check, mortgage payment spread. The spread looks like profit. People love that napkin. It is one of the most seductive napkins in finance. Rent is $1,800. Mortgage is $1,330. Therefore, I make $470 a month. It sounds so neat that intelligent adults repeat it in public without embarrassment. Then reality walks in with a toolbox and a vacancy notice and starts laughing. Property taxes, insurance, turnover cleaning, leasing costs, minor repairs, major repairs, roofs, plumbing, HVAC, legal costs, landscaping, pest issues, appliance replacement, 1 month empty, 2 months with partial payment, one tenant who knows the process better than you do. The friction tax is all the cost that never makes the thumbnail. That is why I care so much about it. Every investment has friction. Stocks have volatility, sequence risk, behavioral errors. But real estate has operational friction. And operational friction is incredibly good at disguising itself in the early optimism phase. The landlord tells the story of the rent check. He does not tell the story of the 10 p.m. leak, the Saturday showing, the contractor who never called back, the property tax increase that arrived like a bureaucratic mugging, or the fact that a major roof replacement can erase a year or more of actual profit. This is why the cash flow numbers people quote are often counterfeit. Not counterfeit in the legal sense. Counterfeit in the psychological sense. They count gross spread and call it return. That is like calling revenue profit because both are numbers. Serious operators know better. The real question is what survives after friction. And once you ask that honestly, a great many cash-flowing properties look a lot more like underpaid second jobs than passive income. That does not make real estate bad. It makes sloppy math embarrassing. The fourth mechanism is what I call the time leak. Most investors price money. Very few price themselves. That is insane. If a man manages his own property to save management fees, he did not eliminate a cost. He absorbed a cost personally. The fee did not disappear. It changed form. Now it is evenings, weekends, interruptions, emotional attention, scheduling, coordination, screening, paperwork, and the mental drag of always having one more thing that could go wrong. People are astonishingly willing to donate their own time to an investment and then tell themselves the return remained high. Number the return got paid partly in your labor, that matters. A stock index fund does not require tenant screening. It does not require you to call roofers. It does not require you to negotiate a security deposit dispute. It does not require your lunch break. It does not ask you to be on call for a geographic asset in a specific local market. That is not a small difference. That is a life difference. This is why I call it the time leak. Real estate leaks time slowly enough that owners often fail to respect what they are giving away. Then 20 years pass and they discover they did not merely own an asset. They serviced it. They worked for it. They organized around it. The asset paid them. Yes, but it also drafted them into its life. Now, some people do not mind that at all. Some are built for it. Some genuinely enjoy operating real property. Fine, but then let us call it what it is, part investment, part business. I have no issue with that. I object only when someone calls a time-consuming small property operation passive. That is inaccurate. If you want to compare real estate with stocks, honestly, you must ask not only what each earned, but what each demanded from you personally. The index fund's silence is not emptiness. It is efficiency. The fifth mechanism is what I call the compound curve. This is where stocks begin to look suspiciously magical to people who dismissed them for a decade. Compounding is a terrible salesman in the early years. It shows up quietly, almost apologetically, a little gain, a little dip, some dividends, some reinvestment, another year, another statement. If you need your investments to flatter your identity every month, compounding will bore you to death before it makes you rich. That is why so few people exploit it properly. They confuse quiet with weak. Quiet is not weak, quiet is patient. The stock investor who buys a total market fund and keeps adding every month is building something different from the landlord. He is building a curve. And curves are deceptive. They look ordinary for the first few years. Then suddenly the gains on the gains begin out, earning the effort that started the whole thing. The machine starts lifting itself. The compounding becomes more productive each year because the bases become larger. Now the investor is not merely contributing. The existing capital is doing more and more of the heavy lifting. That is the compound curve. And once it bends enough, the emotional comparison with the landlord starts changing. The landlord still has stories. The stock investor has acceleration. The landlord still has a visible property. The stock investor has a diversified claim on thousands of businesses and a line on a chart that becomes harder and harder to mock. What people miss is that compounding is not only a return phenomenon, it is a freedom phenomenon. The investor adds $300 a month and the machine multiplies it across time without requiring him to buy another property, sign another mortgage, manage another tenant, or widen his personal operating burden. That is a profound advantage. Scale arrives without the same scale of personal complication. This is why I respect index investing so much. It is not because it is glamorous, it is because it is structurally elegant. It solves the ego problem by removing the need for daily proof. It solves the scale problem by allowing small, regular contributions to accumulate into large, regular consequences. It solves the labor problem by not demanding much attention. And it solves the concentration problem by spreading ownership across a massive productive system rather than one address that is hard to beat over 20 years. The sixth mechanism is what I call the liquidity advantage. This is the part real estate people often dismiss until they need it. Liquidity is not exciting in bull markets. It becomes holy in hard moments. A stock investor with a broadly diversified portfolio can access liquidity almost instantly, in part or in whole, without selling the whole thing, without finding a buyer, without repainting a bathroom, without clearing inspection issues, without title friction, and without a 3-month ordeal. He can trim, he can rebalance, he can raise cash, he can change direction, he can do all of that with a few clicks. That is an extraordinary privilege. Real estate does not behave that way. A property is a block. You cannot sell the kitchen to pay for an emergency and keep the bedrooms compounding. You sell the whole thing, or you borrow against it, or you stand there pretending illiquidity is character. That is why I call it the liquidity advantage. It is one of the greatest hidden strengths of stocks and one of the greatest hidden weaknesses of physical property. And the beauty of liquidity is not only emergency response, it is optionality. The investor can take gains Rotate, harvest losses, change asset mix, deploy capital elsewhere, or simply know that access exists. The landlord is tied to a zip code. He has concentration risk, local regulation risk, tenant risk, municipal tax risk, and selling timeline risk, all tied together in one bulky object. Now, I do not worship liquidity. Too much liquidity tempts people into stupidity. The ease of selling can become the ease of panicking. That is one of the great dangers of stocks. People can access the escape hatch too quickly, and because they can, they often do, usually at the exact wrong time. But the fact that human beings misuse liquidity does not mean liquidity itself is not a gift. It is, you simply need discipline to deserve it. The seventh mechanism is what I call the behavior penalty. Every investment punishes the wrong temperament. Stocks punish panic. Real estate punishes laziness, poor underwriting, weak reserves, and naive optimism about maintenance and tenant quality. This is one reason broad comparisons are so foolish. The question is not only what each asset class can do in theory, the question is what you are likely to do while owning it. If you are the sort of person who checks your brokerage account every hour and emotionally capitulates during drawdowns, then the stock market will tax you through your own behavior. If you are the sort of person who buys a rental because a napkin said you would make $470 a month and you set aside nothing for capital expenditures, then real estate will tax you through your own arrogance. That is the behavior penalty. And it may be the most important mechanism of all because it reveals that the better asset class often depends on which one you can survive without sabotaging. A disciplined stock investor can look almost supernatural after 20 years. A disciplined real estate operator with strong systems, reserves, and tax knowledge can do very well too. A sloppy member of either tribe can underperform terribly while insisting the strategy itself was sound. This is why I hate tribal thinking. Stocks people say real estate is work. Real estate people say stocks are fake. Both are acting like teenagers protecting a social identity. I do not care about the tribe. I care about the full cycle math after friction, behavior, taxes, leverage, and time all finish voting. That is what adults should care about. The eighth mechanism is what I call the tax distortion. Real estate has real tax advantages. Anyone denying that is unserious. Depreciation can shelter income, interest can matter. Operating expenses are deductible. 1031 exchanges can defer gains if structured correctly. And house hacking can collapse personal housing expense in ways the stock market cannot replicate. Those are not side notes, they are real structural edges. But those edges get distorted in conversation because people treat them like holy water. A tax advantage does not rescue a bad property. A deduction does not transform operational chaos into a brilliant investment. A 1031 exchange does not erase the reality that you are still rolling capital through a very specific asset type with all its local and operational baggage. That is why I call it the tax distortion. Taxes matter. They just do not matter enough to cancel math. A property that barely works before tax benefits is not automatically a masterpiece after them. A property that genuinely cash flows well, appreciates reasonably, and is run like a business can be excellent. But if the only thing making the case sound intelligent is the tax angle, you probably do not have an investment. You have a pitch stocks, by contrast, look tax, boring, unless held in the right structures. That bores people into underestimating them. They do not appreciate what low friction, tax-sheltered compounding can do inside retirement accounts, nor do they always understand the elegance of capital gains deferral when they simply do nothing. Again, quiet things get underrated. The ninth mechanism is what I call the second property problem. This is where the comparison separates for good. If the stock investor wants to accelerate, he can increase his monthly contribution from $300 to $500, and the entire compounding machine becomes stronger immediately. No new mortgage, no new legal paperwork, no second tenant, no second roof, no second city. He scales by adding fuel to the same engine. If the landlord wants to accelerate in the same way, he usually needs another property or something close to it. That means another down payment, another financing decision, another operating burden, another concentration bet, another set of repairs, another set of local risks, another possible mistake. Scale in real estate is not linear, it is operational. Every added property increases complexity, much more than every added dollar increases complexity in an index fund. That matters enormously. It means stocks are easier to scale financially. Real estate is harder to scale psychologically and operationally. This is not an argument against real estate. It is an argument for honesty. Some people should own one property and never touch another. Some should never be landlords at all. Some should buy index funds and be grateful they do not enjoy operational drama. Others are true operators and can build remarkable property businesses because they understand systems, screening, reserves, financing, and time management. Fine. But the second property problem reveals the difference between scalable capital and scalable work, and always preferred systems where the capital scales faster than the headaches. The 10th mechanism is what I call the everything count. This is the question the source material ended with, and it is the right question. Did you include everything? Did you include the landlord hours? Did you include the leverage benefit? Did you include the concentration risk? Did you include the repairs that were guaranteed but emotionally treated as surprises? Did you include the fact that the stock investor might panic and sell? Did you include the fact that the landlord might underestimate how much of the return was actually unpaid labor? Did you include liquidity? Did you include taxes? Did you include the emotional difference between volatility on a screen and stress in a physical asset? Did you include the fact that both men may end up in roughly the same wealth ballpark after 20 years, but one may have bought freedom while the other bought stories, or vice versa, depending on the way each handled his engine? That is the everything count. It is the only question that matters. Because simplistic comparisons are toys, only full cycle math is useful. Now let me tell you the identity shift underneath all this. Most people compare investments like spectators. I want you to compare them like engineers. A spectator asks, which one made more? An engineer asks, what did each require? What did each risk? What did each hide? And what kind of life did each create while earning that result? A spectator sees the rent check. An engineer sees the friction tax. A spectator sees the stock chart. An engineer sees the compound curve. A spectator sees leverage. An engineer sees fragility. A spectator sees liquidity as convenience. An engineer sees liquidity as optionality. That is the whole difference. And it is why the right answer is rarely real estate always wins or stocks always win. Those are slogans for people who want identity more than truth. The real answer is that each engine rewards a certain kind of operator, punishes a certain kind of weakness, and creates a different profile of wealth. If you want cash flow theater, tax complexity, leverage power, and operational burden, real estate may be magnificent. If you want quiet scale, broad diversification, personal freedom, liquidity, and compounding that asks almost nothing of your schedule, stocks may be superior. And if you are intelligent enough, disciplined enough, and capitalized enough, you may eventually blend both and let each play its proper role. But before you ever do that, you must learn the habit most people never learn. Count everything, not just the visible dollars. The invisible ones too, that is the blueprint I trust. Begin with the engine, not the ego. Measure return after friction, not before. Respect leverage, but never romanticize it. Respect compounding, even when it is still boring. Price your time honestly. Price liquidity honestly. Price your own behavior honestly. Then pick the machine that fits not only your desired return, but the kind of life you are actually willing to operate for 20 years. That is the final choice. Will you choose the investment that impresses people fastest or the one that survives your full accounting? Will you choose the machine with the best story or the one with the best everything? Count return, because that is the only comparison worth making. And once you make it, honestly, the answer may not flatter your identity, but it will finally respect your future. I know which kind of answer I prefer. You should too.